I do think this is really worth drawing attention to. Donald Trump is going to be attending the wake of the murdered New York City police officer, Jonathan Dillard. Killer of Jonathan Dillard had been arrested 21 times prior to the murder of this young father. Tunnel to Towers, by the way, is going to pay off the mortgage of that young police officer's family. I believe he had a 2-year-old son. 21 arrests. Trump is going to the wake. He was honored to be invited to that wake, he said. Joe Biden is showing up in New York City to raise $25 million, not far from where that murder occurred. And to my knowledge, Buck, no one inside of the White House has even mentioned the name of that police officer who was murdered, Jonathan Dillard. I just think that crystallizes in many ways what this race is about. On the one hand, you have a failed president who won't even acknowledge the policies that he has encouraged and put in place to allow criminals to avoid punishment for their violent acts. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump traveling to New York City to go to the wake. Biden's going to be in New York City, but he's raising $25 million. He doesn't even have the time to pay attention to this New York City police officer who was murdered. Again, it is a snapshot of a campaign that is to come, but it crystallizes things to a large extent for me.
I also understand at some level why they would view Biden's presence, meaning the Democrat media, would view his presence as some kind of political risk, because all it takes is one journalist to decide to do a random act of journalism and say, what do you think about the fact that this guy was arrested 21 times before and they'd previously gotten him on a gun charge, the perpetrator who killed the officer? Don't you think that the district attorney of New York, a Democrat, failed? Don't you think the mayor of New York, a Democrat, failed? These would be the questions that would actually be asked. If this were the first time that individual had ever committed a crime, you might say, look, you can't stop all violence. Obviously, you can't stop all crimes. If you've been arrested 21 times and it's only the 21st time when you murder a police officer that law enforcement is allowed to take it seriously at the prosecutorial level, there's a massive system failure underway. And while Biden always pretends like he supports the police, his party doesn't. That's the problem. It's very obvious that Democrats, because of their race politics, refuse to look at law enforcement with open and honest eyes and deal with the rising crime rates in a lot of our major cities and most of our major cities. And so it's a political liability for them. That's the thing. Because at this point, I remember, Clay, do you remember this? For a while, as the crime rates were skyrocketing, they were saying it's because of COVID, which was, and I don't mean they as in random internet commentators. That was, New York Times, Washington Post. Oh, COVID is causing, which made no sense. If anything, other countries were having huge drops in crime because nobody's interacting and no one's going out the same way. So they've just lied at every step, and they've run out of room to keep lying. And that's why Biden knows he's not going to show. Also, he would get, this is the part of it that I really don't want you to think about. If Biden went to the wake or funeral of this officer, there would be some blowback from elements within his own party. Because you know what they would say? They'd say, why is he going to this? Why didn't he go to, the funeral of Breonna Taylor? Why didn't he go to and by the way, maybe he did, I don't know. But why didn't he go to, they'll name some victim of police violence, right? Because they view this stuff as zero sum. They don't view it as we can just be opposed to violence across the board and want to keep everybody safe. That's our position.
Well, and it also just reflects I would argue one of the biggest issues that we have is anecdotal based media. By which I mean, it's fine to use anecdotes to crystallize larger stories, but they have to be reflective of a larger problem. And oftentimes in the Biden White House, they focus on things that are not actually emblematic of larger issues because they want to have the identity politics scorecard in their favor. And then they won't even mention Lake and Riley. They won't mention this police officer with the 1-year-old. Again, thank you to Tunnel to Towers and Frank Siller for what they're doing to help that family as best they can. And I think it's telling that the family wanted. I believe we have a quote here from Caroline Levitt, who's been on the show quite a lot, saying President Trump is moved by the invitation to join NYPD officer Jonathan Dillard's family and colleagues as they deal with his senseless and tragic death. That's Caroline Levitt putting out that statement yesterday. And again, Biden is in New York. It's not as if he's not going to be there. And he claims to have this connection with everybody over the loss of life of family members because he brings up Beau Biden all the time. But actually, when you drill down to it, in times such as these, he's totally absent. And that's why I think Trump is going to win. Almost everybody who's a police officer is going to vote for him nationwide.
Yeah.
But also a lot of these union voters, because I think that cuts through too, even though traditionally union voters have been Democrat supporters.
I think it depends on the union. I think a lot, but I would say on the police side, absolutely. And it's because when you are a police officer, in as everyone knows, I spent about 18 months alongside officers of the NYPD in the intelligence division, um, effectively a civilian analyst for the terrorism cases that they were putting together. But when you're dealing with police officers, they have to deal in reality, right? They're dealing with reality day in and day out. What's going on the streets? What's the crime level like? What's the threat level in different neighborhoods to civilians, to police officers? How do people react to cops when they're in different neighborhoods? I mean, they're picking up on all this all the time, and the narratives that are out there. I mean, they're running right now. You might have seen this. Gosh, the problem with reading so much news is it's tough to remember the sources. But it's like CNN or one of these places did a whole thing on, I think it was MSNBC, same thing. Did this. Well, Republicans are talking about how crime rates are rising. The data in recent years tells a different story. I just want everyone to understand we had the biggest jump while Biden was president. Okay, we've suffered through the biggest jump in as a percentage in homicides in I think 50 years in this country. Okay, and it's gone up dramatically. And in some places over the last year or two, Clay, maybe homicides have dropped 3% or 7% or 5%. And they're saying, oh, well, see, it's not like crime. Well, if you're at a super elevated level of crime, a 5% drop doesn't mean it is not statistically meaningful. It doesn't mean that they've done anything to change it. But these are the ways that they use numbers to lie. And that's one of the things they're doing about the crime rate now. They're trying to convince people that the cities are not more dangerous. Subway, you see Mayor Adams? Which day is it, Clay? Is it a Monday or is it a Thursday? Because depending on the day, Adams, the mayor of New York City, will say subway crime is down. And then he'll say a few days later, we've got to get our subways safer. They're not safe enough. Well, which is it?
And by the way, it's also a function, for instance, on the subway, something like ridership is down by half compared to where it was pre-COVID. And a large percentage of that ridership bailing is because they don't feel safe, and yet the rates of crime have still gone up even with half as many people riding. So a lot of that is true. I believe the data is the largest single jump in murders on record happened from 2020 to 2021, I believe, or 2019 to 2020. The FBI data, and I think it was up 30% in 1 year murders. That's a pretty massive number. So then when you come back and
started with the George Floyd death,
correct,
and then the riots. So it started
because
it
numbers
started under
were
Trump.
actually, to your point, lower in that year because so many people weren't on the road.
Right.
So it skyrocketed, even though they were coming off of a lower number
They went into by June of 2020, the homicide rate was trending down
massively.
nationally, and then it went skyrocketing, and then the part of this that should have been clear to everybody is, well, once Biden was elected, there had been a lot of shifts in policy, bail reform. I can actually point to the specific things in different places, changing the amount that you're arrested for shoplifting, getting rid of cash bail, refusing to prosecute for certain crimes in San Francisco, in Philadelphia, in New York, in Oakland, and go down the list, in Los Angeles. They made these decisions and things kept getting worse and worse. And under Biden's first couple of years, they kind of continued with it. They're just like, stuff out there. What can you do?
Yeah.
Don't complain about it. Don't be racist. I'm like, hold on. What does this have to do with race? They're the ones who always inject race into the conversation about law enforcement, by the way. If you just say, I want the laws to be enforced and I want criminals to be punished, the Democrats are the ones who will start to say that this is unjust, there's disparate impact, and there's a racial impact of this. And you say, okay, well, which one of us is bringing race into it? They're the ones that always introduce race because this should be universally applicable policy, irrespective of race. Enforce the law,
Yes.
keep people safe. You commit the crime, you do the time. Ask by the way, it's funny, every cop knows this. You talk to any cop in any jurisdiction. I mean, a real cop, not somebody who's not like James Comey, who was a lawyer that they made head of the FBI. I'm like an actual has to walk the streets and occasionally wrestle some shirtless maniac who's, spitting in people's faces and saying that he's a pterodactyl or something. Ask those cops what's going on in these places, and they all say the same thing, which is that the prosecutors won't prosecute, the Patrolmen's Association or the union is scared of lawsuits now, and yada yada, all the way down the line.
And it's super frustrating because these guys bust their ass, they arrest bad guys, and then the bad guys are back out on the street almost before they can even get them to the station.
Yeah. Imagine that, but imagine if you're a cop in the New York City subway system, you're arresting someone, and what people don't realize sometimes is it's same precinct. I mean, these guys aren't necessarily traveling all over the city to do their crimes.
They know the bad guys.
They know the bad guys.
Yeah.
They've arrested these guys before. You go into any precinct, again, I can only speak to New York City, but I'm sure other law enforcement, in cities, these guys have the same, and gals have the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, that guy again. Because if you've been arrested 15 or 20 times, guess what? They know who you are. And you can imagine you're arresting some guy the 20th time, especially if he's, making it a little bit of a resisting arrest situation. People are recording you. You start to be like, what am I doing here? I'm risking my career and maybe my freedom so that a DA can let this guy out in 4 hours. This is, but that's why Biden can't, just to bring it all full circle. That's why Biden's not going to go to the wake or the funeral of this officer, because he can't highlight this stuff. He doesn't want people to see it. There are important changes, life-changing work going on at the preborn network of clinics. Their mission is to save unborn children, and they've been successful in saving the lives of 280,000 babies since their formation. Every day, the lives of 200 babies are saved. That happens when pregnant mothers contemplating life or abortion meet their unborn child via ultrasound, because by introducing a mother to her child on an ultrasound, a baby's chance at life doubles. That experience, along with counseling and the offer of support in the way of maternity clothes, baby supplies, and diapers, are all provided without any cost to that mom. One ultrasound is just $28, and $140 will help to rescue 5 babies. Any amount will help, and all gifts are tax deductible. Preborn relies on donations from individuals like you and me, and they operate without any government funding. To donate securely, use your cell phone and dial pound 250, say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, say the name baby, or go to preborn.com/buck. That's preborn.com/BUCK, sponsored by Preborn.